Hey, Bright Lights, it's Angela, and welcome back to Architecting. I am super pumped today to have with me my colleague, fellow healthcare architect, Noam Platt. Hey, Noam.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So I know you through the American College of Healthcare Architects. We're both certified healthcare architects, and we've worked together on some initiatives through there. And I've been impressed with your passion, but it's not just a healthcare architect. You are also the founder of a nonprofit called Make Good, which specializes in creating assistive devices for people with various physical needs to help them have more quality of life. And architecting gives a portion of the proceeds to charity every year. So you were the charity for this year, and hopefully we can give you an even bigger donation next year. But you've also had a really varied career. You've been a regulator for Washington State, even though you're based in Louisiana. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what led you to wanting to be an architect, then a healthcare architect, and all the other stuff that you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for the donation. Um, so I'll guess I'll tell my architecture origin story. You know how I ended up even in architecture school, and um, it's it's unlike I think what a lot of people think. It's not something I knew as a little kid I wanted to do. I was sitting with my dad at the kitchen table and he was going through the book of majors from Louisiana State University where I went to school, you know, accounting, anthropology. And when he got to architecture, I was so just annoyed by having to sit here and do this. I just said, let's do that. It sounds great. Really not having a full conception of what that even was. And even though I knew a couple architects, you know, as a kid growing up, um, so I didn't come to this as like being artistic or having this predisposition or anything. I feel like I learned everything in design school and in practice as well. So um, I did a 5-year program at Louisiana State University, in which at the end of that, me and a few students undertook a medical project for the local medical school where my dad was working. So one of his colleagues came to me and said, we need a surgical skill lab designed so we can raise money to then build it out. So they needed some renderings and some plans and kind of some of that, work that happens before a real project happens. And so at LSU, they found Rick Lipscomb, one of our fellow ACHA certificate holders, to teach us for 3 semesters to teach us in healthcare design. So that's how I really got into the field of healthcare design through architecture school. So we're very lucky to be undergrad students learning about the FGI guidelines and working. And our class was in Rick's office at WHLC in Baton Rouge, where LSU is. So we were very privileged, and all 3 of us who completed that course are working in various healthcare planning or project roles all over the place in different parts of the country. So I was very lucky to have that experience, and that really set me up for a career in staying in healthcare architecture.
Cool, cool. And you haven't just worked on healthcare designs, though. You've managed to bring this interest in technology to what you're doing, including now branching out into AI. So, how do you put those two things together?
Um, I think it took me many years working in the profession to even kind of see some of the bigger issues that happen in multiple workplaces across multiple projects. And especially when I worked as a regulator and worked with, dozens of teams kind of all over the state and all over the country who were designing projects in Washington State, even though they're based in Texas and wherever. Um, a lot of the issues in just keeping the information categorized correctly. So, I always like to use, I think like many architects, we learn to use technology to do our jobs, but ultimately, there's a lot of issues, and I don't really want to get so far into, why Revit is the way it is and all this sort of stuff. Um, but anything that helps us express ourselves and allows us to communicate better is really what I'm interested in. I'm not like, I think a lot of where the AI is now, just to give a quick brief on what I've been hearing and talking to people about, we can try to generate imagery basically to make books, right? And that's kind of what I think about. What architects do, if you boil it down to the simplest problem, we make books. It's kind of the thing. There's a lot behind that, but ultimately that's what sits on the
Never
table.
thought of it that way, but that's an interesting way to frame a set of drawings.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so, stuff that's generating imagery to match that book, um, is using the system that we have. We don't have to make books. There's other ways to do what we do, but our whole system is set up to do this. So AI to solve that problem doesn't quite understand, I think, what the actual environments are. So, I think that's where it's going to go. And then, more than just using AI to make money, which is to say expedite that process, how do we use AI to actually understand what we're building and why, what we should be building, what can be repurposed, kind of these kind of larger questions, I think is very much more interesting than the like, how do we just streamline the 6-month construction document process or whatever. Um, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of data we need to even do that. So I'm doing a series of interviews right now with people from companies like TestFit and Swap, which is a big AI company out of Israel that does this stuff, to really see what they see for the future as well. So, and it's our responsibility to be on top of this stuff and to use it responsibly.
Yeah, it's really a paradigm shift. And I think sometimes we get in our own way because we're like, this is the process and we can't change it. But we actually, I think, as you're beginning to uncover, we're holding ourselves back as a profession by not questioning some of this process.
Yes. And we're just seeing the first generation of software tools for architects, things like TestFit and Upcodes, right? These are not complicated softwares. They should have existed. I'm getting too far into this, but um, um, the next generation to then really understand how to solve, the problems that the way we think about them is very exciting.
Yeah, and I think without needing to know anything about those softwares, I just think what you're really driving at is we need tools that are intuitive to use that let us explore more scenarios and ask what if more often, not just apply what we know works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And um, I think even, the AHJs are now realizing that they need to move their processes forward and also understand how we're using some of these tools as well throughout the process. So I think that collaboration is going to be key.
And it's an interesting intersection with the make good work because it asks that critical question of how are our buildings failing people?
Yeah, I think it's all about just distilling this kind of like extremely simple issue. And this is kind of, I think, what kind of ties together all of, like you said, doing my regulation work and make good is trying to find that singular problem that has to be solved. That's usually very simple to solve. It's just hard to uncover what it actually is. So in make good, it could be something like a seatbelt buckle holder for somebody who uses a wheelchair, so they can dock their seatbelt while they transfer in and out. This solves a huge problem, and you can't get something like this, and it's this little kind of small intervention. Um, I read a study recently about falls and about the bed height in hospitals being adjusted by somebody drawing blood, and they don't adjust it back to the right height. So people get out of bed in the morning, they fall. And this is like this extremely simple design intervention, put a piece of tape or whatever it is to mark where it should be. That solves a huge problem. So I think this is what we do as architects. We're solving like big groups of these huge problems together and things, but most issues can be really found that really simple solution. And I think that's what's really great about this profession. And those are skills that you build doing that kind of work as an architect and, designing hospitals and reviewing drawings and learning about the code and all that. And that could apply to lots of different areas in life if you want to branch out into, you know, product design, advertise, like whatever your other thing might be, or if you have something else that interests you later, the skills you're building are, I think second to none, frankly. And I think it's the only reason I'm successful with my work at Make Good is because I was a healthcare architect. I mean, it uses the same set of interpersonal skills to, work with a variety of people who communicate in a myriad of ways and getting everybody to understand and provide their input and help lead and all these other things. So, it's, I always, I'm a big advocate of people, obviously going into our profession for these reasons and others too.
So how did you get into making things for people to help them do the tasks of life or hobbies that they enjoyed that their physical abilities no longer let them do?
So most people or many people, as they sit presently, know somebody who's disabled or they're disabled themselves, but everybody will eventually be disabled as well. Um, and I worked at a summer camp for disabled kids, and a cousin who I help with, a good friend of mine as well. Um, and that's what kind of growing up I was exposed to this. And then I had a different cousin actually start an organization that does this kind of work about over a decade ago, and got involved with that a little bit. And then it took many, many years of just maybe doing I did a couple of events, and then somebody locally in New Orleans, just asked me for something, asked to help design a chair. So that's really how it started and really how we keep on going. People really just ask us for things they already know they need. They already have designed most of the things that they come to us with. They need help, understand, refining it and doing all those other things and prototyping it and making sure it works. So it's really one of these things that once you see the demand and need out there, it's very hard to ignore. And it's all like, once again, these simple things in life that many of us take for granted, like tying your shoes, is very difficult. It uses a lot of fine motor and cognitive skills to do and undo your laces as well. It's just like, so we're working on a project around that, and hopefully releasing a product soon. Using a can of hairspray, like I could go into dozens of different things that are just very difficult if you don't have full mobility in all of your limbs. So once you start viewing the world like that and really questioning, why is it this shape? Why is it so hard for to do that? And then there's the obvious stuff, like we went to a TV station to do an interview. We have Philip Dunham on Make Good staff. He's a great friend of mine and a manual wheelchair user, and they had a 2 inch or inch and a half lip to get into their studio. And we had to help them over, and you can actually 3D print a little ramp and put one there. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that and kind of make it a news story. We'll see if they go for it. But once again, it's just like these series of little problems, and they're all solvable. And it's incumbent upon us as designers. We create the world that we're all living in and sharing. It's a small percentage of us that do this. I mean, and we're basically making the future every 25, building that last 25, 40, 50 years at a time, and an environment and products and everything else. So it's incumbent upon us to do it well and for everyone. And it's, universal design works better for everybody. I was just looking on LinkedIn at my friend. He has the ceramic mug, which I unfortunately don't have with me. That's just designed for people with limb difference or who have really have arthritis. And it's just a few simple changes in the handle. It's a wider shape and it's kind of this and that. And it works amazing for everybody. And, he looked at a coffee cup and was like, why do all the handles suck for for everybody? They're all terrible. Like the coffee cups you buy everywhere. And so he redesigned it, and he just launched on Amazon, CURVD, curved without the second vowel. And it's a great mug. I use it, pretty regularly, and it does just work better. So he has that same sort of curiosity. And I when I teach students and to the listeners out there, this is what I hope to be unlocking, is this just like, you know, base primal kind of curiosity about like, why is the world designed the way it is? Who did that? Even our building codes and things like that. Why does that code exist? Those are important questions to ask. And then understand that you have the power to like change that. It's all, unwritten and can be designed a certain way. So, through lots of failure, obviously, and iterations, I mean, it's like the whole thing is just making stuff that doesn't work. But I really view it as a big experiment, and it's a really, it's kind of with our buildings, they're experiments as well, and the stuff, I'm making with Make Good. So that keeps it, that kind of inquisitive nature going, and frees us up as an organization to try unconventional things as well.
Well, I really want to celebrate your courage because a lot of people don't question so much in their life. And your willingness to say yes, your willingness to try things is really, I think, what is leading you to more and more opportunities and really helping a lot of people. Even when you were saying you first were exposed to healthcare architecture, doing a favor for your dad, a lot of people would say, I can't do that. I'm not an expert. But you didn't say that. And I really want to highlight that because that kind of growth mindset, that willingness to try, it's not coming from a place of ego. You're not like, yeah, I could do anything. It's saying, I'll bring what I know to the problem and help as best I can. But just that willingness to do it makes such a difference.
Absolutely. And I mean, I didn't, in that situation, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, frankly. But most of my peers said no. The class was open to anybody, and we had 5 people the first semester and 3 finished. So, many people thought it was boring or uninteresting. And I think, maybe I didn't know how to advocate for it because I was also new. But yeah, I think it's important to just try things that you have no idea how to do. And I try to do it all the time. And I also want people to understand I'm not this like super crazy hard worker up on like, I'm pretty lazy, I'm pretty average, really, in most respects, so it's not something that it takes a ton of time or effort to do some of this stuff either. Just about applying the skills you have and building those skills and working with people and using partners and stuff. So I hope everyone can wants to get involved, because there are opportunities, especially with assistive technology, for everybody. If you're a designer, if you are just interested, or somebody who's disabled, or you or yourself, there's like tons of opportunities with organizations like Make Good, Makers Making Change, and Takuna Law Makers. These are all public organizations you can sign up for that have stuff you can make, and there's requests out there for people who need stuff as well. And I always encourage people to just try to, create something, whether that's with a friend or who is a craftsman, or you want to get a 3D printer. It's really easy to do these days. They're relatively inexpensive and they work really, really well, and are now, this generation, which the past couple of years, the fidelity is really great, and the reliability, it's not really a tinker's device anymore. It much more just kind of works.
Ooh.
So there's actually 2 healthcare systems in New Orleans who have now purchased 3D printers because they've been shown the reliability, and they're going to print things like a phone holder for a hospital bed. So this is not something that's reliably easy to attach to a hospital bed or get in the right position without it being some massive gooseneck, whatever. And we've designed a number of them that are one piece, 3D printed, and kind of just snap onto rails, or any shape. We can do any shape. So the idea being, we'll design them a Hill-Rom compatible phone holder, and then when they have a patient who's in neuro rehab, they can kind of snap it on, and they can, the patients have access to their Skype. Right now, the nurses hold the phone.
Oh,
Yeah, and that's actually like I asked around. It's like that's how, there's no other thing to do. Um, so I'm really excited for projects like that because then the hospitals can do it themselves. There's nothing weird about me giving something to then they're giving to their patients and things like that. So and we're all experimenting. Like the hospitals are experimenting doing this, and it's taken years of them interacting with Make Good and the other organizations I talked about, seeing universities get involved and seeing results with their own patients on some trial projects for them to get the comfort level. But I think you're going to see a lot more innovation in that field. And I think the focus is really on design work. And with the 3D printers now, the real work in doing anything, especially architecture, is the design work itself, is taking the time to think about things and do drawings and do prototypes and testing. Once you have the thing that we've designed and made good, to reproduce it is almost inconsequential with the 3D printer technology. So, I always put this focus back on the design skills and using those skills because those are really valuable skills that most people do not have, or even a really strong conception of what it takes or what that really means. So it's incumbent about us to share that skill with people when we can and bring out that inner like questioner that's in everyone.
Yeah, because it makes such a profound difference, and your passion is contagious. I see your posts on your LinkedIn. It's always like, look what we designed. And it's often just a very small, very simple device, but it is world changing for the person who receives it. It makes their life easier. It lets them do something they enjoy that they had to stop doing. And that passion is really contagious. I know when we run into each other at conferences, you're always like, look what I have, and you've always got some piece of something with you. And it kind of goes to this idea of how you do anything is how you do everything. So it's not too small, because what I see here that then is so scalable is the way that you hear somebody's story. You don't just take a request and say, let me follow instructions and just find a way to make it work. You are connecting with them as a human being. You are learning their story. And therefore, what you're producing has this infusion of, I don't know if you want to call it love, but a true connection and compassion for that person and what it really means to them to be able to use whatever device you are making. And you make everything at every scale.
Wow, that's very, very, I think, beautifully said. I hadn't really thought about it quite like that. When the Tulane students help out, they sign at the bottom of the little devices they made. In this case, the toddler mobility trainers, and um, I do like to think about these objects after they're out and in the world and being used, and the joy they're bringing to people. And um, there's no like everything we try to make is try to be very celebratory and professional and like very high end. We try to do stuff as high end and advanced as possible as well, and really infuse what we do with where the design practice generally is going. And it's really amazing hearing everybody's stories who reaches out. And we try to do as many projects as we can, and we get there's unfortunately we can't get to everything either. But what is really neat is when you make one thing like this guitar pick holder we made recently, and we have a number of people reach out, 3 or 4 who also need the exact same thing. So then it's very easy to like, we can just print it out and we modify it a little bit if we need and send it. And then you're really making good numbers of help kind of getting those devices out there. So it's really an alternative way to then of just launching something commercially, like going to Guitar Hero and selling the guitar pick, whatever you call it, Guitar Hero, whatever, Guitar Center. Um, and because of that, everything can be customized because it's made right there. So, all the guitar picks, we put the names of the recipient on top on, and there's a lot of like fun you have with it too. and, you know, always building new skills, doing that kind of work, new design work. Um, so it's really a great field to get into. And I tell everybody this, it's a nascent field. Like this kind of custom 3D assistive tech is a very young field. There are many people doing it like me out there, some great friends of mine and great community of people. But if you're looking for an opportunity to like create innovation and actually like, if you want to launch products or you want to, you know, invent something or do research or, you know, solve a problem of your own, this is a great field to get into in assistive tech. It's a great time to do it. The technology is just maturing to the point where, you know, people like us who have these kind of design skills can now use this high-end manufacturing at scale, and we can use these design tools that are now much easier, and, you know, we're used to using them as well. So, you know, most of my chairs are drawn in Revit, believe it or not. So kind of getting back to Revit is great for making books. I've seen how all these organizations make assembly guides for their different chairs and whatever. Revit is actually the best tool ever to make a set of instructions, because that's what you're doing when you're doing construction documents. So I've made really great products using Revit that are for assistive tech as well. So it's fun to mix and match all these different things at scale,
Yeah.
and it really, like, you never know where it's going to go. It's impossible to predict when you start working on one of these projects. And I think that's really what drew me in a lot as well. And that's true for anything you do in life, you know.
Yeah, and I can definitely see how your architecture training helps you do this and bring fresh thinking to it. But let's talk about the reverse. How has working doing assistive technology helped you be a better architect?
It's a great question. It's it's that, I think, that problem solving mentality and just exercising that skill. And I think also to an extent, you know, the iterative process and getting just very, very comfortable with it. But doing, like, you know, there are short and sweet architecture projects, there's short and sweet assistive technology projects. Um, They're also 7-year long chair design processes, because that's how, on average, how long it should take to design a great chair. And some buildings also is a 7-year long development process. So much of the, you know, project management skills and what I've learned, even working with a more diverse group of people doing the make good design projects, you know, giving me more ways to communicate, you know, with people who have no exposure to design, no exposure to architecture whatsoever. So that's definitely helped. Kind of those soft skills has helped. But, you know, really that inquisitive mind when I'm investigating a floor plan is really, like, you know, getting put on a new project. Just, you know, recently put on a large new surgical building, and, you know, just being able to, you know, read the intent of the design through the plans and through the drawings, and then kind of reverse engineering and saying, what are they trying to solve with the, you know, what are we, and then, you know, this is a project I just joined, but, you know, that's the question you start with when you start the next project. Like, what's that main problem we're trying to solve with this effort, and really solving that, and then kind of going from there. So that kind of clarity is very important when you have these big projects that, you know, are going to take, you know, a few years to really see through at the start during this, like, critical design process. So
Yeah.
it certainly helped. And then, you know, obviously just having a better awareness of accessibility in general and universal design in general, kind of clearances and toilet rooms, and making sure that, like, curbless showers really are curbless. And, you know, there are all these little things, obviously, that stack up to be an accessible space or not. A big thing is going way beyond the ADA as far as, you know, some of the clearances and access points and things like this. I like to tell, you know, I say that you know, all codes are a compromise, right? Two parties came together, multiple parties came together, had a discussion about what the code should be, an argument, and that's what it ended up being. And the ADA is no different. And it's pretty well documented, you know, the various business owners and, you know, disability groups. It was this, you know, it's how legislation works. But um, it's a minimum thing, right? It's
Mhm.
it's the least you could do. So you know, you still see buildings like brand new multi-use apartment complexes just surrounded by stairs. And there's instead of a ramp, there's one of those little electric lifts that's always breaking. I mean, new buildings like this that planning departments are allowing. And so, you know, I think, and then you're allowed to do that, you know, and I think that's those kinds of things our profession should undertake a
Yeah.
better
It's a
uh,
miss. It's a missed
custodial.
opportunity.
It's a big missed opportunity for everybody, actually. So, um, yeah, you know, my friend Mark Raymond from Split Second Fitness, he's a wonderful guy. He's in charge of the New Orleans Rapid Transit Authority. He's really, really interesting guy. He's a power chair user and he takes elected officials around in wheelchairs around New Orleans downtown. And I mean, we're a special kind of broken sidewalk kind of place in New Orleans, but it's you know, it's a really great insight. And if you've never, as an architect, got in a wheelchair around your own building you've designed, I think you should. And that's something when I'm on site, you know, I have done before and I plan to do again. Um, because you just need to get that understanding, you know, and need to talk to people and bring disability advocates and disabled people in the community into the design process. You know, if you design with a community, it's going to be so much better. And this is the same ethos that we use at Make Good and the same ethos that we should be practicing as healthcare architects. It's a big mind project. It's not about one person's vision or one executive's want. It's supposed to be a big collaborative mind project where everyone comes together to make something great for public health, right? And I think that's really what motivates all of us healthcare architects for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's an equity issue. When we think we don't need to do this stuff, or we only do what the code makes us do to the minimum standard, or we're not thinking about these little moments that matter, we are really depriving a lot of people of being able to live their best lives. You know, we're shortchanging them, and that's not fair. And we may even be harming them in some cases because of things they won't do because it's too hard to do it or access it.
And it's then once again, the solutions are simple. They're not even like when done correctly, it's not doesn't look like a solution. It just looks like something beautiful, you know. So
Right, right,
that's the real shame about it. It's not like this intractable problem. There's no way around. Like we are in total control of this entire thing, you know?
right,
And
right.
that's coming back to that responsibility and that awareness and curiosity, you know. I'm always thinking about the people I know and how they would, like something like using an elevator, you know. How does somebody who does not have cannot um use any of their limbs to push an elevator button, maybe somebody who uses eye gaze to drive their wheelchair with their eyes, you know, how do they call an elevator? And
Mm.
I've seen various people try to design, different kind of button pushers and things. Besides some students at Tulane do a really nice prototype. But, you know, Otis, maybe you should come up with something. You know, that's kind of how I
Just
feel about
maybe.
it. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of Schneider, like what's going
Yeah,
on? So
yeah.
kind of how I feel about it is that, you know, these are solvable problems, but, I think maybe an elevator that you just stand in front of for 3 seconds and it calls, it might be nice. You know, I might like that instead of pushing some nasty button. So, I think they need to change their thinking. And don't even get me started on toilets, where the amount of toilet stuff I've done and research and toilet rooms I've actually drawn. Like this is once again this kind of like simple design stuff that goes back hundreds of years that we haven't really changed as a profession, that all really needs to be kind of looked at. You know, elevators is one thing, a little more complicated, but I think there's a way to do it for sure. And I would like to see those companies step up. And same thing for all the caller and everybody else too. Like they're part of
Yeah,
it, and we're limited sometimes by those
yeah.
problems. Yeah.
Well, if you're listening, elevator manufacturers, this is your call to action. We want to see some changes here. And that really, I think, in addition to asking these better questions of how can I, instead of, well, I guess this only works this way, it is about the network. And that is part of what's helped you be successful on your career path is the alliances you've formed, but also the fact that you have allowed people from all parts of your life to inform all parts of your life. I, in a recent podcast episode, talked about decompartmentalizing. So you're not saying, well, my friend who's in a wheelchair isn't an architect, so I don't need to talk to that person. You're bringing them in. And I think that idea of converging things, but also building our network and not being afraid to activate it and putting these calls to action out is important as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do a lot better job, doing that. And the projects that do it correctly are, they become very popular places. Um, if you're out there listening, you work in like hospitality, especially restaurants, etc. The way people with disabilities like to travel is, they have a hotel they really know takes care of them and has the right amount of accessibility. The beds are at the right height, the showers they can get into, etc. And then from there, they find all the different restaurants that are also like that. They're also very accessible. And that's where they go. They're not going to go other places because they're probably not going to be accessible. So there's actually a huge economic discussion here that think it's overlooked a lot. I'm working with UNO, University of New Orleans, on an accessible tourism conference with my friend Mark Raymond, like I mentioned. He actually wants to develop he says, the world's first like fully accessible, every single room hotel, and he wants to make New Orleans like this accessible tourist destination, which I think is a great idea. And it's that kind of thinking. And he's my age, he's a younger guy, and I'm seeing more people really connect with this idea of kind of improving these environments and not so driven by the owner just want to squeeze money out of something, but it being a real place that enhances life for everybody.
Yeah, and just giving yourself permission to question the premise a lot of the time and to not just gripe and complain, but to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And um, you know, if you're an architect out there and you're doing a project that is like you are being squeezed and it is something that it doesn't make you feel comfortable, you should find something else to do, go work for somebody else or find some other kind of work if you can, because your skills are too valuable to seriously to do that. Like people need us to make the world turn and build things and do their businesses and everything else. We're a vital part of society. And so if you can find alignment in that, you know, that's the key, because we are actually really needed and we really do get to help people a lot, a lot of people. Um, but yeah, you have to do it for the right reasons. And we see the projects that do it for the wrong reasons. They get torn down 5 years later because they ultimately didn't work out from an economic perspective. Or, if they're in New Orleans, they just collapse while they're building them. But it's like, you know, this idea of placemaking, I always kind of thought was like this kind of like weird architect concept. Like I was just like, this is just like some black turtleneck talk that doesn't really. But I've been to a few projects that were designed, new design buildings that were very intentional, community centers, and they actually do make a lot of sense on paper as well. And it's like a great investment, and this like community is buoyed. It's this whole thing. So, um, that's our job to communicate that to the people who have the money, you know, so to speak. Then that includes the people in the healthcare field. And that's a very difficult thing to do. There's this whole infrastructure of healthcare executives that that make a lot of these decisions. We need to work with them and make sure they're understanding the community needs. And we want to be great stewards of their money, right? And use the data that is available to us. This is one of the very interesting areas in AI I think we're going to see is AI really understanding the world of the development of buildings and how we're using them, and kind of this more strategic planning, especially when it comes to healthcare, because they can use all this data that they have on not only demographics, things like Foresight Digital, which is a digital software that kind of helps understand the scoping idea. Um, but using that kind of predictive modeling, I think is going to be really, really cool for our profession. And then is going to lead to us doing just more interesting projects, right? It's going to
Yeah.
lead to us to doing a building type we might have never thought of that actually is what fits a particular site with a particular community that needs this and needs that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, there's
In
a
the
lot of
field.
freedom when you can get people to overcome their fear of risk. And part of how you do that is showing them how a different way can work.
Yep, absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
in the absence of knowledge, it's always easier to say no, because if you do what you know, you get what you know, and people find that acceptable, even though we all know it's really not. But if you try something different and it doesn't work, you could get fired. So there is that need for us, and I think we need to really embrace that as part of our job, to show people how things could work, how a different approach really can be better.
If we don't do that, we get fired anyways, right? Because we go with the first thing they said we should do, and there's going to be some reason it's doesn't make sense, or it's too expensive, or it's going to cost this later. There's always something like that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so
No one respects the waitress, right? And it's not our job to be a waitress filling in order. It's our job to be an informed expert that co-creates and brings innovation to the table.
oh, that's really interesting. I like this waitress analogy because I think our job is like, I don't know, is it selling the seed to the farmer to grow the plants to
It might be.
take them to, like probably like that's where we are actually at. And um, that kind of responsibility, yeah, so it is important to, I know some owners are just very difficult, you're not going to argue with somebody or tell them they shouldn't build something somewhere, right? It's not what we're talking about. It's much more about, thinking about how we're going to use that data more in the future, and make sure that decision making is in the best interest of, your time and doing this project correctly. Um, and when, like I said, when it's done well, it works really well. And those projects where it's done well, folks listening out there, if you're working on a project that feels like a dumpster fire and is really difficult and you have 1,000 RFIs, that project that was done really well probably also felt like that to the person doing it at the time. So, it's like we're all getting through it,
Yeah, yeah.
working to be
It
successful.
always feels like the hardship was worth it when you see the end result. So when you look at
Yeah,
famous people's stories and you hear about what they overcame, it's like, well, of course they did that. But when you're living it and you don't know what's going to happen, it's easy to take the setback as the sign that you should give up.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think we have to get used to, and you would, and I did failing and getting stuff wrong in the profession. Like I'm, I will go on record, I guess, saying like I made plenty of mistakes that it probably cost money. I know they did, right? Like things did happen, and I learned from all of those things, and they didn't happen again. And I think many architects go through that, and it's kind of part of it, and it's our job to teach and make sure those mistakes are caught before they're installed and all this kind of stuff. Um, so so it is just like you can't like don't be down on yourself when that happens because it's happened to everybody. As far as I can tell, it's happened to everybody before you and everyone after you. I'll tell you this, the best piece of advice I could give you is that if you are building an inpatient room, make sure your window is 36 inches above the finished floor maximum and no more. And, that's a mistake that happened before my time in Washington State that they didn't catch until there was already the whole exterior was framed. You know, those 3 or 4 inches of it being, at 39 inches cost like $3 to $4 million to fix,
Oof.
So yeah, and they had to do it because CMS will not. And that time, that was a CMS rule. It wasn't the building code. It wasn't in the FGI, and it was just a CMS thing. But if they wanted those reimbursements, you got to lower the window. So those are the kinds of mistakes that are free to catch early. And everyone on that team learned that, right? I'm sure you can find those group of people will tell you the same story I just told you, because it is what it is. But it's that's why being familiar with the building code is really important, because a lot of those mistakes are on a certain set of a few sheets of drawings, and the big ones you can figure out early in a project right when you get going. So um yeah, it happens throughout projects, and that's part of
Yeah,
our job, is to kind of navigate. And the contractors make mistakes, owners make mistakes, they change their mind. I mean, it's just,
yeah,
this is our job
exactly.
to,
Or
like,
people change stuff in the field without
yeah.
realizing why it was that way, and they don't ask. So,
Yeah, I mean, we all have the endless catalog of things that we've seen and been through, and it's our job to kind of take it with a smile and figure it out, that problem solving thing. And I think it's a really fun profession for that reason, and um I ultimately think that if you want to be an architect, you should be. It's really, like, I don't think it's that technically burdensome, compared to, I don't know, if you wanted to do something crazy scientific. It's really much more about, working with people and understanding 3D space, working with drawings, understanding how to, like, communicate ideas. And I think, like I said earlier, communicates to a lot, it contributes to a lot of different parts of your life.
absolutely. Well, this has been so much fun. I really enjoyed hearing a little more about your origin story and where you're taking things. So, if people want to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Oh, so you can check out Make Good at makegood.design, or on Instagram, Make Good NOLA, like New Orleans, Louisiana, NOLA. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you want as well. And if you're interested in volunteering for Make Good or those other organizations, Makers Making Change and Tom Global, they're linked on my website, and there's a volunteer form on my website as well. So if you're interested in kind of getting more involved, if you want to make something or see how we've done it, you can reach out there.
Yeah, build your network. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes architects often make is we can be very insular and we can tell ourselves we're too busy. But the power of networking is you hear somebody else's story, you learn about what's possible or what somebody else has already done. So you don't have to waste your time doing the same thing when it was already there and you could have just used it and built on it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're all working in the same world, designing stuff, I think we work together, and that's the best part of it.
Yeah, the collaboration over the competition. So thank you for being so generous with your resources. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on the call today. Definitely, if you had a great takeaway from this, please share it on Instagram. You can tag me at Architecting Podcast or Noam at McGoodnola, or you can tag us on LinkedIn. We love hearing your thoughts and your insights after one of our guests has shared their story. So thanks again so much for being on today.
Thank you again.